From the Cronkite studios in downtown Phoenix, this is Cronkite News.
Good evening and welcome to this special edition of Cronkite News on Arizona PBS. I'm Tanai Williamson. Many of the issues that impact Arizona, like immigration, Native American relations, and veteran affairs, are the center of debates in our nation's capital. Tonight, a look at our top stories from our Cronkite News Washington Bureau.
A new study says that there are hundreds of missing or murdered Indigenous women in metropolitan areas that have gone unnoticed. Washington reporter Lillian Donahue has more.
The Urban Indian Health Institute surveyed 71 cities across the United States to highlight often underreported cases of violence against Native American women. Arizona was one of the top states with the most number of cases.
Nobody is looking for our women, and they are dying.
Abigail Echo Hawk spearheaded the study that captured the attention of senators of both parties. Researchers said they found more than 500 women in urban areas who were missing or murdered, but the crime is not reflected in any government database. The names of those lost are written on a skirt she carries.
The Jane Doe you see on this skirt, today is the anniversary of her death. She was from Tucson, Arizona. We don't even know her name.
By the study's estimate, Tucson has the second highest number of murdered Native women in the country. Arizona ranks top 10. Echo Hawk says misclassification and redacted police records couldn't paint the full picture.
When we did our public records request, some of the police departments didn't get us the information we would have liked. We need to know this information in order for us to really understand the depth of the issue.
We have to assume here that the 506 identified cases probably undercount the incidence of missing and murdered Indigenous women and girls in urban America.
Lawmakers are taking notice. North Dakota Senator Heidi Heitkamp is sponsoring Savannah's Act, which would require law enforcement to update entries for missing and murdered Native Americans across the country.
If we think we can solve a problem, you will never solve a problem you won't admit you have, that you don't have data on.
Barney Enos with the Gila River Indian community says he finds the numbers disturbing, but Savannah's Act is just a start.
As tribes, as agencies, we can do a lot more beyond the legislation. All of our efforts combined, we can work to combat those numbers and see a decrease in that.
In Washington, Lillian Donahue, Cronkite News.
The confrontation at the border is likely to renew sparring in Washington over funding for a border wall.
It's a fight that could lead to a partial government shutdown this month if both sides dig in their heels. Charlene Santiago has more from our Washington Bureau.
Congress is running out of time to reach an agreement on border wall funding. The Department of Homeland Security budget will expire by the end of next week, and 2 weeks after that, we'll see Democrats take over the House.
Everybody understands that wall funding will be tough to come by in the next couple years, so it's a now or never thing.
And that's exactly what President Donald Trump reminded Congress today on Twitter, even threatening to close the southern border permanently if needed. This a day after U.S. authorities fired tear gas into a crowd of migrants in Tijuana, Mexico.
The president is clearly playing up this situation at the border as this decision point is coming to a head. And we'll have to see whether that will be effective, but I don't think that it changes either side's kind of negotiating.
So far, the House has included $5 billion, while the Senate has only agreed on $1.6 billion.
It's ridiculous that they've waited until this point to obtain the funding for his key campaign promise.
A promise the president continues to push for and has threatened to veto any legislation that doesn't include funding for the wall. At this point, it's unclear exactly how much money Trump will get for his wall, but Bolger says it's unlikely Democrats will shift their stand in a few weeks left in this session.
The Democrats in the Senate have agreed to $1.6 billion, which was already a stretch for them. And as the balance of power shifts in January, it doesn't seem likely that their position would change.
A budget standoff could lead to a shutdown, but with 75% of the budget already approved, this would only affect a limited number of agencies, including DHS. In Washington, Charlene Santiago, Cronkite News.
But what about voters who go to the polls on Election Day after recent stories of Georgia and Texas where people claimed voting machines had actually switched their votes? Should voters here be worried about the security of the election? Imani Stevens in our Washington bureau talked with some experts.
Cybersecurity experts say the threat of tampering with an election is real, and then election officials insist that your vote is secure. So who's right? Turns out they all are. University of Michigan computer scientist J. Alex Halderman makes election hacking look easy.
Benedict Arnold won because the malware that...
The fear of election tampering has been in the headlines since the 2016 election. But some experts say with that fear comes a more subtle threat.
2016 was a big wake-up call. That's when we collectively learned that, yes, in fact, there are foreign governments that are interested in changing our elections, but also trying to erode voter confidence.
A 2018 Unisys Security Index report on U.S. attitudes on election integrity seemed to back that up. It said 86% of people reported some level of concern about compromised voting systems. To Homeland Security Undersecretary Christopher Krebs, that fear is almost as much as a threat as hacking.
Gets into your head, gets into my head as a voter, and gets us doubting the integrity of the process.
That same Unisys survey included some people who said they might not vote because of election integrity concerns. Turner said the threats of election interference are real and should not be ignored.
Threats are always changing. The tools are always getting better as well as cheaper, and there are always going to be new motivations for trying to get into a system to either destroy the information or to change it.
But neither should the threat to voter confidence.
If we can focus on securing our elections for this midterm as well as future elections with the idea that voter confidence is the thing that we need to be most concerned about, we'll be much better off.
When asked today during a press conference, President Donald Trump said that he is confident in the upcoming election and that it will be perfect and safe. And officials with the Arizona Secretary of State's office says they're in a good spot for Tuesday. In Washington, Imani Stevens, Cronkite News.
The just-ended elections were remarkable for a number of reasons. Besides being bitterly fought, they saw high voter turnout, record numbers of female candidates, and a number of electoral firsts. But as anyone who turned on a TV in the past few months probably knows, they were record-setting for another reason. Cronkite News reporter Ian Solomon has details from our Washington bureau.
My brother.
My brother. And I endorse Dr. Brill.
Dr. Brill. Dr. Brill.
If you felt bombarded by political ads like these in this election season, there's a reason for that. 129 million reasons, in fact.
That's the amount of money spent in Arizona on political ads. The $129 million set a new record in Arizona, which endured more than 40,000 political ads last month alone.
It was part of a record $3 billion spent on cable and broadcast election advertisements nationwide in 2018, an amount that campaign media calls absolutely unprecedented for a midterm. It has shattered every record there is, and that kind of spending rivals previous presidential cycles. Elaine Camark of Brookings Institute says it's all part of the game.
There'll be a lot of ways to try and talk to voters. And frankly, as long as it's pretty even between the two parties, that's a good thing.
By that measure, it is a good thing, as spending between parties nationwide only differed 2%, with Democrats having the slight edge. Camark says we can expect to see more spending like this in the future.
Money always goes up. It always has gone up, right? I mean, so we're seeing more spending on television, but we're also seeing internet ads. Lots of drive time radio.
Retiring Arizona Senator Jeff Flake may be making his last stand against President Trump on Capitol Hill, threatening to block judicial appointments in a bid to protect the ongoing investigation into corruption in the Trump administration. Imani Stevens reports from Washington.
Last night, Arizona Senator Jeff Flake vowed to vote against any judicial nominee. But when it came time to test that vow this morning, things didn't work out quite like he planned.
We have a number of judicial nominations and bills on today's agenda, and I will take the lead on holding all of them over.
That was Judiciary Committee Chairman Chuck Grassley today, saying he is delaying a vote on 15 judicial nominees, a move that didn't change Flake's position.
All I can do is say I'm not going to vote to advance anybody that is before the committee now, and I won't vote for any of these nominees on the floor until we have a vote on the Mueller probe.
The vote he's talking about would be on a bill to protect special counsel Robert Mueller's probe of possible Russian meddling in the 2016 election. Flake demanded that vote yesterday with Senator Chris Coons.
My colleague from Delaware, Senator Coons, and I have made a unanimous consent request to bring this to the floor, but it has been objected to already.
That resolution has been blocked by Senate leaders, but Flake and Coons said it is needed more than ever now that President Donald Trump has forced out Attorney General Jeff Sessions.
The justification given in April for not bringing it to a floor vote was that nobody was being fired. There's nothing to see here. Special Counsel Mueller was not in any danger. That clearly is not the case now.
The case now is that Acting Attorney General Matthew Whitaker is overseeing the probe, which he has criticized before. Senate Majority Leader Mitch McConnell repeated claims yesterday that the resolution is not needed to protect the Mueller investigation.
We know how the president feels about the Mueller investigation, but he's never said he wants to shut it down. I've never heard anybody down there say they want to shut it down. I think it's in no danger, and so I don't think any legislation is necessary.
Flake conceded that his lone vote might not make a difference, and that McConnell could simply hold nominations until January, when Flake is no longer in office.
Now, theoretically, if the vice president comes and breaks a tie, if all Republicans are for and Democrats against, they would still pass. So that's not where my leverage is, but I'll use what I have.
In Washington, church groups joined today to protest building a southern border wall. Our reporter Daniel Pearl was on Capitol Hill.
Advocates swept Capitol Hill today as the budget fight looms to demand that money being spent on border enforcement agencies is spent back home in their communities. Abigail Orrin of Pittsburgh thinks resources being spent at the border could be used to better prevent tragedies like the October shooting that claimed 11 lives at a synagogue in her city.
Today I'm going to meet with my senators and representatives to talk to them about how I would like to see money that is currently being allocated to ICE and CBP redirected into our communities.
Orrin said she hoped the money could be used to help combat white supremacy at home and fund infrastructure like schools and parks. But for Tucson resident Vicky Gaubecca, immigration battles in Washington have real-world consequences. As someone who lives near the border, however, she says a wall won't help.
It's harmful to our communities. It actually creates deaths in our communities because it forces people to cross the more dangerous parts of our border. It causes flooding in the Rio Grande Valley. It caused flooding in Nogales.
Gaubecca said she hoped to convince Arizona Representatives Martha McSally and Kirsten Sinema to vote against President Trump's proposed border wall during the lame duck session. However their meetings go, the clock is ticking. There are 15 more days left in this legislative session, and President Trump has threatened to shut down the government if he does not get funding for the border wall. In Washington, Daniel Pearl, Cronkite News.
It's a little change to the law that supporters could solve a big issue for one Arizona tribe. Lillian Donahue in our Washington bureau has the latest on a bill that's under consideration in the Senate.
The Gila River Federal Rights-of-Way, Easements, and Boundary Clarification Act would give the Gila River Indian community 3,400 acres if it passes, solving a long-standing trust issue between the United States government and the tribe.
Every tribal nation has come to a point of dealing with either mismanagement or undermanaged record keeping.
And it's that mismanagement of records and trust lands by the government that has made infrastructure planning difficult for tribal leaders in the Gila River Indian community. The House bill now pending in the Senate is in response to a lawsuit filed by the tribe a decade ago to regain land and trust rights they say were encroached upon more than a century before.
Almost 150 years later, the Gila River Indian community sought resolution in the court, and ultimately the Department of Interior agreed to a settlement.
They want to make sure sacred sites are protected by them and not outside influences, and this will allow for that to occur.
Representative Tom O'Halloran introduced the bill and says it's just one part of a larger effort to right wrongs that have lingered in Indian country for too long.
It's a never-ending process right now, and it's not been, I I think the Congress has not done its job over the last number of decades.
The Gila River Indian community is located south of the valley, stretching from Goodyear to past Queen Creek. Councilman Barney Enos Jr. says that the tribe wants to be good neighbors to Phoenix, while also restoring rights to their people.
Number one, preserve, but also to ensure that the folks affected by this don't become victims of a dispute.
In Washington, Lillian Donahue, Cronkite News.
Click it or ticket, a familiar PSA to remind drivers and passengers to save lives by buckling up. In our Washington, D.C. bureau, Cronkite News reporter Imani Stevens talks with a few experts on the impact of ignoring seatbelt warnings.
This photo is remarkable, but what's really remarkable is no one was injured. The Yavapai County Sheriff's Office said it's because the passengers were wearing their seatbelts.
You just don't see that except in a Hollywood film.
Unfortunately, not everyone in Arizona wears a seatbelt. A National Highway Traffic Safety Administration study found out that states with stronger seatbelt enforcement laws had higher usage rates than states with weaker laws. But Alberto Gutierrez, the director of the Arizona Governor's Office of Highway Safety, says Arizonans are wearing their seatbelts.
Kansas, Arkansas, and Mississippi, they all have primary seatbelt law, okay? And guess what? We beat them in the usage rate.
However, there are states with primary seatbelt legislation for front and back seat passengers.
Arizona's laws are not as strict as other state laws. For example, you do have states that are enforcing primary seatbelt legislation for front and rear seat passengers.
In the front seat of a car, putting on a seatbelt is second nature. But in the back seat, it's not as common or even required in Arizona, and that can be dangerous.
When you're not belted in the back seat in a crash, you essentially become a human missile. You're moving forward at tremendous force, and you can not only are you at high risk of injury yourself, but you're also risking injury to the people in the front seat, even if they're belted.
Tests by the Insurance Institute for Highway Safety show what happens when backseat passengers are not wearing a seatbelt.
In our survey of the people who said they didn't buckle up all the time in the rear seat, 4 out of 5 of those people said it was because either it was a short trip or they were riding in a ride-hailing vehicle or a taxi.
When you're a passenger, you're really giving the control, obviously, to the driver.
The latest data from the Arizona Governor's Office of Highway Safety for 2016 shows 329 people died in a car accident without their seatbelts on.
Buckled up in a passenger vehicle decreases your odds of dying by 45%. So nothing is 100% effective, including seatbelts, but seatbelts nearly double your chance of surviving a crash.
Odds that Conrad Jackson will take every time.
The number of individuals that have no injuries or minor injuries, front seat, back seat, it doesn't matter. Seatbelts save lives.
In Washington, Imani Stevens, Cronkite News.
Many refer to the Korean War as a forgotten one, and as its veterans age and pass away, those who served are determined to preserve their stories.
Washington Bureau reporter Lillian Donahue flew from Phoenix to the nation's capital with dozens of Korean War veterans on the final Arizona honor flight of the year.
This is me over here, the good-looking one.
Arizona has always been home for 89-year-old Pat Haggard. He went to school, met his wife, raised 3 kids, and became a grandparent in Phoenix.
And been in the valley my whole life.
But when he was 21 years old, he left Arizona to fight in a war thousands of miles away in Korea.
I was drafted along with 4 of my friends into the Army in January 13, 1951. I was toting a machine gun all through the rice paddies every night or 2 or 3 nights a week.
It's an experience that's taken him decades to finally share with a family who never even knew he carried the weight of a machine gun and a war all these years.
This was the first time I've thought of Korea in 15 years.
I've heard things today I've never heard.
Or where we fought most of the time.
One night remains seared into Pat's memory. His platoon was bogged down while pushing up the 38th parallel.
I think there were 17 or 18 of us of our platoon, which was probably 45, 50 men to start with. That was
As Haggard unpacks his memories, he wants to make sure his story and those like him isn't forgotten. That's why he's saddling up the wheelchair, going coast to coast. And he's doing it with one of his closest friends, Bill Kinnerup. The two graduated high school together, went off to the war together, and now they're taking on the nation's capital together.
We're all just so happy to get it and to go with friends. You know, this is going to be much, much better.
Like something I never dreamed could happen. It's just like old home week to have him to be going with Pat.
The two are flying with nearly 40 other Korean War veterans and supporters on the final Arizona honor flight of the year. From Phoenix to the district, volunteers, guardians, and bystanders all taking pause to honor America's heroes.
Thank you, bud.
Arizona Honor Flight has taken 79 trips and over 2,000 World War II and Korean War veterans here to the nation's capital so that they can visit their own memorial. Now, for veterans and volunteers alike, it's an impact like no other.
This resets my whole life and puts in perspective what's important out there.
Hard time was patrolling.
The trip is a chance for every veteran to look back at the history they made, like Donald Bowles, a former Navy minesweeper who's searching for his ship.
Yeah, that's the same ship that I was in Korea with. Isn't that something?
And Doyle Porter, a former Air Force pilot who finds his airplane etched into stone.
See, this is how they mounted the engine.
It's Haggard and Kinnerup's first time seeing the Korean War Memorial, a moment frozen in time and a way to look back at themselves almost 70 years ago.
This was every night. Like I say, these guys depict the raining weather and you wore your poncho. It's emotional, but it's something we dealt with at the time and proud of it.
Among all, there's one shared hope for their legacy, that the men and women of the Korean War are not forgotten.
Lest we forget why we have the great nation that we have. This is what makes us who we are today, is these people, and we need to not forget them.
Most of us can't forget it. I just hope that history doesn't leave it as the forgotten war and remember the job that was done then.
God shed his grace on thee and crowned thy hood with brotherhood from sea to shore.
In Washington, Lillian Donahue, Cronkite News.
Veterans Day was this weekend, and so was an annual gathering aimed at helping vets who struggle with post-traumatic stress disorder. Imani Stevens in our Washington bureau has the story of the 31st annual Operation Freedom Bird.
Going to war meant life or death, and healing from those traumatic experiences took some time, particularly for those with PTSD. For some, the journey toward healing went from Arizona to here, this Veterans Day.
William Quill.
The nonprofit organization Operation Freedom Bird is helping veterans take their steps toward comfort.
They're able to then move forward in their lives, which in some cases stopped when they returned.
I never thought about that until I got here and I seen the names, and then now I can see the kids' faces.
For over 30 years, groups of veterans have made this journey to the nation's capital. And for most, the memories are still raw.
There was a feeling of death every place and everything you did over there.
It's the start of the healing process, and a reason why Vietnam War veteran Rick LaFawn says he never understood what healing meant until now.
It was like literally stepping back into time. Going back into a place that you're always trying to bury.
And years later, LaFawn had a special moment. He reunited with veterans from Korea, who also served in Vietnam. But the number of people that serve in any war is getting smaller.
There's very few people in this life that really understands the horror, the disgust, the fear, the living condition.
The VA estimates that about 30 out of every 100 of Vietnam War veterans have suffered from post-traumatic stress disorder.
It's the community that actually has to help with PTSD. It can't be just an individual thing.
And 50 years later, LaFawn says it wasn't good to hold on to the pain this long.
Survival isn't just coming back with all your body. it's the baggage that you bring back with you.
In Washington, Imani Stevens, Cronkite News.
Arizona schools have been in the spotlight this year, but not always for good reasons. Low pay, large classroom sizes, and teacher vacancies are among the many problems schools in the state face. But there are some bright spots, including the 5 Arizona schools honored today as National Blue Ribbon Schools. Cronkite News reporter Imani Stevens was at the awards ceremony in Washington.
Of the 349 schools recognized as National Blue Ribbon Schools this year, 5 from Arizona made the list, selected for their overall academic excellence or progress in closing achievement gaps. And educators from those schools were quick to share the credit for this achievement.
It takes a community to raise a child, and it definitely takes a community to educate a child. And when all the different parts are working together, it really helps those students to be the best that they can be.
This is the 36th year that the U.S. Department of Education has given out these awards, an honor that has been given to more than 8,800 schools. But each year is special for the winning schools.
We have strong teachers so that we keep building strong students and a stronger country.
And Marcia Kalkman, a teacher at Gilbert Classical Academy, says it's not just the teachers who are receiving this award.
I also couldn't be more proud of the students because truly it's the student effort.
An effort that entire communities take on to continue bringing these awards home to Arizona.
Put our best foot forward and really be champions for kids. I think it makes sense for this to happen right now.
While there are a lot of hot topics in education right now, Abrams says that doesn't affect how teachers act once the school doors open.
And the students enter the building. They are the highest level of professional educators that you can find and are truly dedicated, go above and beyond daily to help each and every student.
And that dedication is what the award recognizes Arizona schools for each year. In Washington, Imani Stevens, Cronkite News.
That's it for Cronkite News tonight. Thank you for joining us. For top Arizona stories anytime, go to cronkitenews.azpbs.org.